The back door of Sullivan's Diner crashes open at exactly 3:22 in the morning. January frost cuts through the gap like a blade. A woman stumbles through the darkness, her body moving in short, jerking motions. Valentina Harper. 29 years old. But something about the way she moves, the hollow depth of her eyes, the thin line of her shoulders, makes her appear decades older than her years. Blood. So much blood. Her yellow waitress uniform, the one with the VAL embroidered in fading thread across the pocket, is soaked completely red across her torso and abdomen. 2 gunshot wounds in her left shoulder. 3 in her abdomen. 1 tearing through her right thigh. Another grazing her ribcage, leaving a burning line of fire across her skin. 7 bullets. All of them meant for someone else. The smell hits first, gunpowder mixed with copper, mixing with the stale grease and old coffee that hangs permanent in the air of a diner that never closes. Her vision tunnels at the edges. The black and white checkered linoleum floor beneath her orthopedic shoes blurs and sharpens and blurs again. Her feet leave crimson footprints with every gasping step forward. The neon sign in the front window flickers. Blue. Pink. Blue again. The light catches her face, and her face is not the face of a woman. It is the face of someone who stopped being afraid of dying a long time ago because she has already lost everything that made living matter. She collapses. Her body hits the checkered floor hard. Her apron tears as she falls. Bills and coins scatter across the linoleum in every direction. $34. That is all she has left in the entire world. $34 after paying the shelter fees, after buying bread at the discount market, after every other cent went to the people who took her apartment and her stability and her future in a fire that burned for 4 hours on a Tuesday night while she stood in the street watching everything become ash. In her trembling hand, she still clutches the debt collector's letter. The word stamped across it in red ink, final notice. $150,000. 12 days remaining. The corner booth sits in shadow, but 3 men occupy it. Dark suits. Expensive fabric. The kind of tailoring that costs more than Valentina Harper earns in 6 months. The men freeze mid-conversation. Hands instinctively move toward weapons. Then he rises. Dante Russo stands slowly from the booth. 6'2". His shoulders broad beneath an open white dress shirt that reveals a chest bearing a single scar, a thin line running from collarbone to sternum, a permanent reminder of survival. His dark hair is cut short, sharp. His eyes are the color of a storm about to break. 48 years old. A man whose presence fills rooms the way water fills empty spaces, seeping into every corner, impossible to ignore. He has been sitting in this booth for the past hour. Watching. Observing. Valentina has worked double shifts for nearly 4 months. 16 hours a night. Every night. Her feet swelling in the orthopedic shoes. Her hands raw from washing dishes in water too hot, coffee stains permanent under her fingernails. She never complained. She never broke. She never asked for anything. He has watched all of it. Now he kneels beside her bleeding form. The little girl, Valentina gasps, her voice barely a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. Is she, did she? She is safe, Dante says. His voice is deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. Because of you. She is alive because of you. Behind him, his Lieutenant Sergio and Enzo exchange a look neither has seen reflected in the other's face for 15 years. In 15 years of working for Dante Russo, they have never seen him kneel beside anyone. They have never heard him speak with gentleness. They have never witnessed his hands move with anything but controlled precision and violence. Now his hand touches her face. Just touches it. The way a man might touch something fragile. Something that might shatter. The fluorescent lights hum above them. Outside, the Chicago wind howls through the frozen streets, rattling the diner windows, rattling the thin walls, rattling against everything fragile enough to break. Valentina's breath comes in short gasps. The room spins. She thinks of her 2 children sleeping in borrowed clothes at St. Catherine's shelter across town. She thinks of the foreclosure notice on her old apartment. She thinks of the fire that took everything. And then she thinks of nothing at all because the darkness comes and pulls her under like a current too strong to fight. Title card appears now. But what Valentina Harper did not know, and what Dante Russo has just begun to understand in this singular moment, is that the little girl she threw herself in front of was not just any child. She was the daughter of Margaret Harrington. The daughter of a woman connected to every powerful family in Chicago. A child whose protection was supposed to be absolute. And the man kneeling beside her bleeding body, the man whose lieutenants watch in silent shock, was Dante Russo. The most dangerous man in the city. A man who built his empire on the foundation of vengeance after watching his own father murdered when he was 17 years old. A man who believed weakness was a death sentence and trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. This night would change everything he believed about himself. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning. Let us understand how a woman with nothing left to lose ended up taking 7 bullets meant for a Mafia princess. Let us understand who Valentina Harper was before the fire. Before the debt. Before the moment that changed everything. 12 hours earlier. The shelter smells like industrial cleaner and broken dreams. St. Catherine's. For stories of concrete and determination, run by a woman named Sister Doreen who stopped judging people a long time ago and started simply loving them instead. The morning light comes through the windows thin and grey, filtered through years of grime and the general exhaustion of a city too cold to be kind. Valentina Harper stands in the kitchen at 5 in the morning, her dark hair pulled back in a braid that is starting to fray at the edges. She is thin. Not the kind of thin that comes from careful eating or discipline. The kind of thin that comes from rationing. From making $34 stretch further than the laws of physics should allow. Her hands are rough, calloused from years of handling hot water and sharp objects. Her eyes are the color of weathered wood, brown, but with something harder underneath. Something that has learned not to hope because hope is a thing that costs money she does not have. She stands at the stove, making breakfast for 73 people with a budget of $18.40. The number sticks in her mind because it always does. Every penny counted, every transaction measured, every calorie calculated and stretched and multiplied like a miracle that happens 7 days a week. "Mama," a small voice says behind her. Valentina turns. Her daughter stands in the doorway. Micah. 5 years old. Hair the same brown as her mother's. Eyes larger than the rest of her face, the way 5-year-olds' eyes are. She wears a hand-me-down t-shirt with a cartoon character whose name has already faded from too many washings. "Good morning, baby," Valentina says. Her voice changes when she speaks to her daughter. Something softens. Something becomes less about survival and more about love. "Are you hungry?" "I am very hungry," Micah says. She says it seriously, like she is reporting the weather. Like her hunger is a simple fact that deserves acknowledgement. Valentina reaches down and lifts her daughter. The weight of her is small and real and the only thing in this world that feels like it matters. She sets her down at the large communal table, already crowded with other residents of St. Catherine's. Other people with nowhere else to go. Other people for whom $34 was a fortune. She plates eggs. Soft, scrambled, with just enough butter to make them taste like comfort. She adds toast. She adds a small cup of orange juice. The juice is reconstituted, made from concentrate, but Micah does not know the difference. To Micah, it is simply juice. Simply part of being alive and cared for. "Mama, will you read to me tonight?" Micah asks, her mouth full of eggs. Valentina sits down beside her. She does not eat. She will eat later, when Micah is asleep, when there are leftover eggs, when the day is nearly finished. Rationing. Always rationing. "I have to work tonight, baby. Remember? I told you about the night shift." Will you be back before I wake up? The question lands like a stone thrown into still water. The truth is no. She will not be back. She will work 16 hours, from 9 in the evening until 1 in the morning. Then she will walk home through streets that are not safe for women alone at night, but the only alternative is paying for a taxi, and a taxi is $4.50 that she does not have. I will try, Valentina says, which is not the truth, but it is the kindest lie she knows how to tell. 3 hours later, Valentina stands at the bus stop on Chicago's south side, waiting for the 7:15 that will take her across the city to Sullivan's Diner. The wind cuts through her thin coat like a blade wrapped in ice. She has no scarf. Her gloves have a hole in the left thumb. Her shoes are orthopedic, prescribed by a doctor she saw 2 years ago, before the fire, before everything became about survival. The bus comes. She pays with coins counted from her pocket. $34 left. Every dollar in her mind is divided into its purpose. Rent for the shelter. Food. Medicine. The debt collector's letter. Always the debt collector's letter. Sullivan's Diner sits on the corner of 5th and Madison. A small place. Red vinyl booths. Black and white checkered floor. A counter with stools that have been sat in by thousands of people over the decades. The owner, Mr. Sullivan, a man of 73 with a face like weathered leather, hired Valentina for months ago without asking too many questions. You need work, you take the shifts, he said. She has taken every shift since. The clock shows 8:36 p.m. 13 minutes before her shift begins. Valentina ties her yellow apron around her waist. The embroidered voile has been there since the diner opened 31 years ago. She is not the first person to wear this apron. She will likely not be the last. But for now, it belongs to her. It is her uniform. Her identity. The thing that gives her purpose for the next 16 hours. The diner fills slowly. Truckers. Night shift workers. A few couples looking for coffee and pie at an hour when most sensible people are asleep. Valentina moves between tables with the efficiency of someone who has learned to carry 3 plates at once, to remember orders without writing them down, to smile even when her feet are screaming and her lower back has started to burn. At 10:15 p.m., the back door opens. A woman enters, tall, with blonde hair and the kind of clothes that announce money. Margaret Harrington. 47 years old. She wears a cashmere coat that costs more than 3 months of Valentina's rent. Her hands are manicured. Her perfume is expensive enough to clear a room. Behind her walks a little girl. No more than 6. Golden hair. A pink coat with fur trim. Margaret Harrington's daughter. But also something else. Something that would become clear only later. Margaret Harrington's niece was arriving in Chicago tonight. The daughter of Margaret's brother, who had married into the Russo family. The little girl walked beside Margaret with the natural grace of someone who had never known want. Never known hunger. Never known what it meant to count coins. Table in the back, Margaret snaps at Valentina, not looking at her. The way people snap at furniture. Valentina nods. She leads them to a booth in the corner. She pours water into glasses. She places menus on the table. She says, "What can I get for you this evening?" Margaret does not even look up. She points at the menu with one perfectly manicured finger. The little girl looks at Valentina. She smiles. "What is your name?" the child asks. "Valentina," she says. Then, softening slightly, "You can call me Val." "I am going to get hot chocolate," the little girl says seriously. "With very many marshmallows." Valentina smiles. For just a moment, something in her face changes. Something becomes less about survival and more about tenderness. She thinks of Micah, waiting at the shelter. She thinks of her daughter's face when she reads bedtime stories, the way her eyes move across the pictures even though Micah cannot read the words yet. "Coming right up," she says. What she does not know is that a man has been sitting in the corner booth for the past hour. Watching. Observing everything. His name is Dante Russo. And his entire world is about to shift on its axis because of a waitress and a cup of hot chocolate. The wind howls outside Sullivan's diner. The city sleeps. And in the darkness, fate is arranging itself into patterns no one can yet see. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. The fire took everything on November 3rd at 2:47 in the morning. Valentina Harper stood in the smoking ruins of the Hayes Street apartment building wearing only pajamas and a coat someone had handed her, a stranger's coat, wool that scratched against her collarbone. The November wind tore through the empty streets like a blade wrapped in ice. Her children were asleep at St. Catherine's shelter across the city. She was here. Alone. Holding a single water-damaged photograph. In the photograph, Micah was 6 years old with her dark eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Emma was 4, her blonde curls catching morning light. Both of them smiled at the camera in that innocent way children smile before they understand that loss is possible. Everything was gone. Her clothing. The furniture she had bought piece by piece from thrift stores. The laptop she used for night school classes she was no longer attending because there was no time, no money, no hope. Her mother's wedding ring. The only valuable thing she owned. The only thing that connected her to a life before this one. A firefighter approached her. His face was grey with ash and exhaustion. "Faulty wiring," he said. "It happens. You're lucky no one was inside." Lucky. The word landed like a stone. She did not cry. Her tears had dried up somewhere on a Greyhound bus 3 years ago when her husband left her with 2 children and a lease she could not afford. She stood in the smoke and the cold and thought about the shelter. A cot. Donated clothes for her children. Industrial cleaner that burned the back of her throat. Other families coughing in the darkness. 12 hours later, Valentina stood in the intake office at St. Catherine's shelter. Mrs. Chen, a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and tired hands, filled out paperwork. "Temporary housing," she said gently. "We can keep you for 90 days. After that, you'll need permanent placement." Valentina nodded. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I have savings. Not much, but—" "Let's get your children settled first," Mrs. Chen said. She was the kind of woman who had learned not to ask questions that would require difficult answers. The shelter was a converted church basement in the south side. Rows of cots separated by thin white curtains. Fluorescent lights humming overhead like insects trapped in plastic. Micah and Emma were sleeping on a single cot, curled together like puppies, wearing donated clothes 2 sizes too big. A little girl's dress hung off Emma's small frame. Micah wore a Chicago Bears shirt that reached his knees. Valentina sat on the edge of the cot and watched them sleep. She counted their breaths. 1, 2, 3. 48 breaths per minute. The normal rate for a sleeping child. She had learned to count breaths instead of heartbeats because heartbeats reminded her that time was passing and she had nothing to show for it. 3 weeks later, Valentina started at Sullivan's Diner. The diner sat on the corner of 5th and Milwaukee in a neighborhood that was slowly dying. The neon sign in the window flickered pink and blue. The booths were cracked vinyl. The countertop was laminate that mimicked marble and fooled no one. But it was open 24 hours and it hired people who had no references, no address, no hope. Her manager, a man named Ray with tobacco stains on his fingers, showed her the register. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. for nights a week, he said. 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. 3 days a week. Tips are yours. Food is half price for employees. Don't steal from the register. She did not steal from the register. Her feet ached within the first hour. Her orthopedic shoes, white and scuffed, with the left sole splitting open like a wound, were not enough to cushion 12 hours of walking. The yellow uniform, faded from countless washings, had been hemmed twice to fit her 5'4" frame. It smelled like grease and regret. At 3 in the morning, sitting on an overturned milk crate in the kitchen, Valentina counted her tips in a small spiral notebook. Tonight, $47. Yesterday, $52. The day before, $39. She wrote the numbers in careful handwriting, adding them up, multiplying by the shifts she could work, subtracting the shelter's minimal fees, subtracting the cost of bus passes, subtracting the cost of keeping her children clothed and fed. The debt collector's letter sat in her locker, folded and refolded until the creases had worn through the paper. $150,000 from medical bills when Emma was born premature 3 years ago. The insurance company had denied coverage. The hospital had sued. A judgment had been entered. Wage garnishment had started taking $500 a month from pay she barely earned. She had 12 days left before they took everything. At the bottom of her wallet, she had $34. $34 to her name. She kept this number separate from the others. This was the amount that meant the difference between eating and not eating. Between keeping her phone on and losing it. Between surviving and ceasing to survive. What Valentina did not know was that a man had been coming to Sullivan's diner for the past 6 weeks. He arrived between 2 and 4 in the morning, always the corner booth, always alone or with 2 other men who dressed like shadows given human form. The first man was stocky and scarred, with a neck like a tree trunk. His name was Sergio. The second man was tall and lean, with silver threaded through his dark hair. His name was Enzo. They sat in that booth and ordered black coffee and said nothing to each other, just sat in the kind of silence that only powerful men can maintain. The man who owned the booth was different. He was tall, 6'2", with shoulders that filled out his tailored charcoal suit like they were born to wear expensive fabric. His dark hair was slicked back from a face that was all angles and intensity. His eyes were storm gray, the color of water before a hurricane. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a thin white line that someone had tried very hard to give him and he had survived anyway. His name was Dante Russo. He drank his coffee black and he watched Valentina work. Sergio noticed the watching and said nothing because Sergio had worked for Dante Russo for 15 years and had learned that some things were not questions you asked out loud. He simply observed and remembered and waited to see what would unfold. Dante Russo saw things that most people missed. He saw how Valentina slipped an extra sandwich to the homeless man who camped outside the diner's back door, wrapping it in foil and handing it to him like they were equals sharing a meal. He saw how she never complained when drunk customers grabbed her wrist or made comments about her body, just gently extracted herself and refilled their coffee cups with a steady hand. He saw how she smiled at her children's crayon drawings taped inside her locker, a blue house, a red sun, stick figures holding hands, even when her hands shook from exhaustion and her eyes were ringed with the dark purple of someone who had not slept in days. He saw her strength because he recognized it. It was the same strength he had watched in his own mother's face when he was 17 years old and his father was murdered. That night, his father had been coming home from a business meeting. Rival family. A setup. 6 bullets in the chest in an alley behind a grocery store. Young Dante had been in the apartment when his mother received the call. He had watched her face reorganize itself. Watched her become something harder. Watched her pick up the phone and tell his father's brothers that she would raise Dante alone, that they did not need to come, that she would make her own way. She worked 3 jobs after that. Dante remembered the smell of her coming home, different perfumes layered on top of each other, the scent of French restaurants and hotel lobbies and hospital corridors. He remembered her hands. Always moving. Always working. Always keeping him alive. She had died when Dante was 22 years old. A stroke. Her heart had simply stopped, as if it had been asked to work too hard for too long and had decided that stopping was the only reasonable response. He had built his empire on the foundation of that loss and that shame. The shame of hiding in a closet while his father died. The shame of being too weak to protect his mother from exhaustion. And now, at 38 years old, sitting in a corner booth at Sullivan's diner at 3 in the morning, Dante Russo was watching a woman who carried herself with that same quiet dignity. That same refusal to break. Enzo leaned forward. "Boss, we should go. You have the meeting with the Harringtons at 6. Dante did not respond. He was watching Valentina pour coffee into a cup with such steadiness that not a single drop spilled, even though he could see the tremor in her wrist, the exhaustion in the slope of her shoulders. He had no idea, in that moment, that this woman was about to shatter every rule he had built his life around. He had no idea that in 72 hours, everything would change. The clock on Sullivan's diner wall ticked forward. 3:15 in the morning. The city slept outside the windows. And in the corner booth, a man who had built an empire on silence and violence watched a waitress who had nothing but determination. Neither of them knew that fate does not always arrive as thunder. Sometimes it arrives as the simple act of pouring coffee. Sometimes it arrives in the moment when two broken people look at each other and recognize the language of survival in each other's eyes. The January night cut through Chicago like a blade wrapped in ice. 14 degrees, the temperature so sharp it burned the inside of your lungs when you breathed. Stars hung above the city in diamond sharpness, the kind of clarity that only comes when the cold drives everything warm away. 2:47 in the morning. Sullivan's diner sat quiet on North Avenue, its neon sign casting a sickly pink glow across the empty parking lot. Inside, Valentina Harper wiped the counter with a rag that had seen better decades. Her waitress uniform, pale blue and stained with the residue of 1,000 shifts, hung loose on her frame. She had not eaten since the day before. She had not slept more than 2 hours. The tremor in her wrist was not from the cold seeping through the gaps in the diner's ancient window frames. It was from the weight of knowing that in exactly 15 days, if she could not find $150,000, her children would have nowhere to sleep. The letter sat in her apron pocket, folded so many times the creases had worn holes in the paper. Final notice. Not a suggestion. Not a warning. A countdown. The apartment fire had taken everything 6 weeks ago: clothes, furniture, photographs, the small ceramic box where she kept her grandmother's recipe cards. What it had not taken was the debt. Debts do not burn. They simply wait in the ash for you to find them. A black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot at 2:51. Through the window, Valentina saw it arrive, sleek and impossibly expensive, the kind of car that represented 6 months of her entire life. The door opened. A little girl stepped out, maybe 5 years old, wearing a pink coat that matched the diner's neon sign. Sophia. Valentina recognized her because Sophia came in sometimes on Saturday mornings, and Dante Russo always ordered the same thing: black coffee, no sugar, toast dry. Sophia always ordered hot chocolate with 3 marshmallows, and she always asked Valentina if the marshmallows were going to melt into the chocolate or float on top. The kind of question only a child asks. But tonight Sophia was not alone. A second car pulled up, and 3 men emerged from the darkness like shapes coalescing from shadow. The first was Tyler Brennan, 32 years old, moving with the particular swagger of someone who has never been told no. His suit cost more than Valentina's monthly rent, grey flannel, tailored so precisely it looked like a weapon itself. He had his aunt's sharp cheekbones and his own cruel mouth. A mouth that smiled while saying things that destroyed people. Tyler grabbed Sophia's arm. Not hard enough to leave a mark immediately. Hard enough that the little girl made a small sound of protest, the kind of sound that reaches into the chest of anyone who has ever protected a child. Valentina saw it through the window. She saw it the way you see something that stops time. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed their constant low frequency. Her hands were still wet from the sink. And she saw a man threatening a child. She did not think about her own 2 children sleeping in borrowed coats at St. Catherine's shelter across town. She did not think about the 15 days or the $150,000. She did not think about the $34 in her pocket, the last money between her family and absolute nothing. She ran. The cold hit her like a wall. Her breath came in visible clouds, white and then gone, white and then gone. Her shoes, orthopedic, worn at the heel, purchased 3 years ago at a Goodwill, slapped against the frozen parking lot. There was frost on the asphalt in patterns like someone had spray-painted the ground with water and let it crystallize. Let her go. She's just a kid. The words came out of Valentina's mouth before her brain could catch up with her body. Before she could calculate the cost of heroism. Before she could measure her own worthlessness against this moment. Tyler laughed. It was not a laugh that contained joy. It contained the sound of privilege that has never met resistance. Two men emerged from the Mercedes. One of them was already reaching inside his jacket. "Who the hell are you?" Tyler's voice was coated in something chemical, cocaine, probably, or pills, or the simple intoxication of power. His Aunt Margaret had protected him his entire life, smoothing over problems, making consequences disappear before they could land. He had built his entire personality on the assumption that the universe was designed to accommodate his desires. He aimed his gun at Sophia's head. Not to fire. Not yet. Just to demonstrate the point, the way you might shake a finger at someone who is not listening. To show her the barrel of what was coming if she did not step back. Valentina stepped forward instead. It happened in slow motion and no time at all. A person experiences paradox at the moment they become someone different. The moment your life divides into before and after. Tyler squeezed the trigger because he was angry and high and because nothing in his experience had taught him that some people would stand in front of bullets. Some people would calculate the mathematics of their own insignificance and decide it did not matter. The first shot hit her right side. Her ribs cracked. The second shot hit her shoulder, spinning her, and still she did not fall. The two men panicked at the sound, at the sight of blood spreading across a waitress's uniform, and they started firing too because panic is contagious and fear is indiscriminate. For more shots. Fast. So fast the sound blurred into a single roar. 7 bullets in 4 seconds. Valentina felt each impact separately. They did not hurt at first. They felt like being hit by a baseball bat wrapped in fire. They felt like her body was a house and someone was breaking all the windows from the inside. She stayed standing for 3 seconds, holding Sophia, the child untouched, not even scratched, and then her legs understood that the instructions coming from her brain no longer made sense. She stumbled backward toward the diner door. Her blood left a trail across the frozen parking lot, each drop freezing slightly before the next one landed. The glass door of the diner was warm compared to the outside air. She made it through. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed their constant frequency. The coffee maker hissed. The clock on the wall, the one she had stared at for 1,000 shifts, counting down the minutes until she could return to the shelter and her children, ticked forward. 3:22 in the morning. Valentina collapsed against the checkered floor, her uniform spreading red like spilled wine. The neon sign outside cast pink light across her face. And in the corner booth, the man who had been watching her pour coffee with such steady hands for the past month rose to his feet. Dante Russo moved with the precision of someone who had learned long ago that every motion should count. Tall, broad across the shoulders, his $3,000 suit absorbing the sight of her blood the way dark fabric absorbs light. He was beside her before Sergio and Enzo could reach the door. Before the diner manager could process what he had just witnessed. Before Sophia, standing in the parking lot covered in someone else's blood, began to cry. "Stay with me. Valentina, stay with me." His voice was not the voice of a mafia boss. It was the voice of someone who had just watched someone choose to die rather than let a child be hurt. The voice of a man who had built an entire empire on silence and violence and had never heard anyone say the things Valentina's blood was saying now. Enzo was already on the phone. "Dr. Chen. Now. Sullivan's Diner. Yes. 7 gunshot wounds." His words came out clipped, efficient, the kind of efficiency that comes from knowing how to move in a crisis. Dante pressed his hands against her wounds. He had done this before, applied pressure, stopped bleeding, kept people alive through sheer force of will. But he had never done it for someone who mattered. The distinction was everything. "Call an ambulance," Valentina whispered. "My children. Sophia is safe." Your children are safe. Enzo is handling it now. But she could not hear him through the static in her ears, the way her vision was starting to tunnel into darkness. She was conscious enough to register that a man was kneeling beside her, that his suit was ruined, that his men were moving with the kind of organized urgency that only certain organizations could produce. She was conscious enough to wonder if dying in a diner at 3 in the morning, with a man's hands pressing against her wounds, counted as a good death. It did not. Dr. Chen arrived in 8 minutes with a medical team that looked like they had dressed in the dark, moving through the diner like shadows with purpose. They stabilized her. They moved her. She was transported to a private hospital on the north side, the kind of hospital that does not ask questions, that keeps records that do not exist, that specializes in keeping people alive when the official world has declared them a problem. The surgery took 6 hours. Dante sat in the waiting room still covered in her blood. Sergio stood against the wall. Enzo made phone calls, and with each one, the machinery of consequence began to move. Across Chicago, in a penthouse apartment on the 40th floor, Tyler Brennan was receiving phone calls from his aunt. In an office downtown, Margaret Harrington was making calculations about damage control, about how much money it would cost to make this problem disappear, about whether her nephew's stupidity was worth protecting. Neither of them understood yet that protection has limits. That there are people who cannot be protected from the consequences of their own choices. Dr. Chen emerged from the operating room at 1:15 in the afternoon. His mask was around his neck. His eyes were the eyes of someone who had spent the last 6 hours fighting against the basic laws of biology. 7 bullets. Massive internal damage. 2 of them just missed her heart. She should be dead, Mr. Russo. I do not know how she walked 50 feet with these injuries. Dante closed his eyes. Is she alive? Yes. But she will need weeks of recovery. She cannot return to work. She cannot lift anything. She cannot. I understand. What does she need? Right now, she needs to sleep. When she wakes, she needs someone to tell her that staying alive was worth it. Dante rose from the plastic chair. He had sat in plastic chairs in hospitals before, when his mother was dying, when he was 17 and his father was already dead, when he was alone with an empire building itself in the spaces where his family had been. He had never sat in one for someone outside his organization. He had never sat in one for a waitress he barely knew. At 4:47 in the morning, Dante drove to St. Catherine's shelter. The night manager, Mrs. Patterson, knew who he was. Everyone in Chicago knew who Dante Russo was. She was terrified but tried to hide it. I need to see the children. Micah and Emma Harper. They were asleep on cots in a room with 12 other children. Micah was 6. Emma was 4. They slept the way children sleep when they are exhausted beyond dreams, sprawled, mouths open, one of Micah's arms hanging off the edge of the cot. There was a drawing taped above Emma's pillow, a crayon picture of their old apartment, the way it looked before the fire took it. The colors were getting faded where she had drawn it over and over, adding details each time, the window where the cat had sat, the kitchen where Mommy made pancakes, the door where Daddy used to leave for work before he left for good. Dante understood something in that moment. He understood that his empire, his organization, his 40-year reign over Chicago's criminal underworld meant nothing compared to the decision a woman had made at 2:51 in the morning to step in front of bullets for a child that was not hers. Pack their things, he said quietly. Someone will be here within the hour to collect them. Where are they going? Somewhere safe. Somewhere with heat and food and clean beds. Somewhere their mother will want to go when she wakes up. He left an envelope on Mrs. Patterson's desk. Inside were $50,000 in cash. Not a down payment on anything. Not an advance on a debt. A simple statement, these children are not your problem anymore. By the time Valentina woke 3 days later, her children were sleeping in a warm apartment in a neighborhood where people did not get shot in parking lots. Rosa DeLuca, a grandmother who had worked for Dante's organization for 15 years, was in the kitchen making pasta sauce that smelled like the only good memory anyone in the apartment had. Valentina's eyes opened to a room that was not a hospital room. It was a bedroom, carefully decorated, with windows that looked out onto a quiet street. The walls were pale blue. There was a small vase of flowers on the nightstand. Fresh flowers. The kind of thing that required someone to think about her. The pain came second. It came like a wave, like her entire body had been replaced with broken glass. She tried to move and couldn't. Tried to understand and couldn't. Tried to remember and got only fragments, a pink coat, the sound of gunfire, the feeling of falling. A man was sitting in the chair beside her bed. Dante Russo, in a fresh suit, dark eyes watching her with an intensity that made the pain seem distant. He leaned forward when she opened her eyes, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "My children," she whispered. "Safe. Federation clean clothes. They ask about you every hour. Why would you help me? I'm nobody." The words came out before she could stop them, the calculation of her own worthlessness so automatic it did not require thought. She had spent her entire life understanding her place in the world. The place where people like her worked for people like him. Where gratitude was expected but respect was not earned. Dante leaned back. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and solid like an oath. Like something that once spoken cannot be taken back. "You threw yourself in front of 7 guns for my daughter. You are not nobody." The roof stretched out like a grave beneath her feet. 22 degrees. Snow falling in soft, deliberate flakes that melted the moment they touched her coat. Valentina stood at the edge of the building, 6 stories up, her surgical scars throbbing beneath layers of cotton and wool, and the Chicago skyline glittered with the kind of indifferent beauty that made her want to scream. It was 11:33 p.m. on a Tuesday. The night was so quiet she could hear the snow landing, a whisper like 1,000 tiny confessions. Her phone was in her hand. Detective Morrison's number pulled up on the screen. She had called 3 times that day. Each time, Morrison said the same thing: "We need you to testify. Brennan is making threats. We can protect you." Protection. The word tasted like a lie. Valentina closed her eyes. Testifying meant retaliation. It meant years of looking over her shoulder. It meant watching Micah and Emma sleep with one eye open, waiting for the knock that came in the dark. Foster care might be better for them. Clean beds. People trained to keep children safe. People who were not marked by 7 bullets and circumstance. 1 step. That was all it would take. The snow would catch her hair as she fell. It would be over. All of it. The fear, the exhaustion, the mathematical certainty that she was poison to anyone she loved. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she did not recognize at first. Then she saw the message thread going back 6 weeks to a number she had given Rosa DeLuca. It was from Micah, sent from Rosa's phone. "Mommy, I brought you a picture of us in our new home. I love you." The drawing was attached. Stick figures holding hands in front of a building with a red door. A house with windows shaped like eyes watching out at the world. Valentina's knees buckled. She sank down onto the cold roof, the phone pressed against her chest, and sobbed in a way she had not sobbed since the night in the diner. Not for herself. For him. For Emma. For the drawing that a 5-year-old had made with a crayon that cost nothing, that meant everything. Not today. She would not do that to them today. She went back inside, shaking so badly she could barely grip the stairs. Found Dante sitting in her kitchen at nearly midnight, a key she did not remember giving him hanging loose in his hand. He was making tea. The kettle was already steaming. He took one look at her face and knew where she had been. Where her mind had gone. He said nothing. Just poured the tea into a chipped mug she had owned since before the fire, added honey, and sat across from her. His presence was like a weight holding her to the earth. She drank the tea and stopped shaking. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are welcome," he said, and meant it in a way that required no explanation. 6 hours later, at 6:14 in the morning, 12 men in black tactical gear moved like ghosts through Tyler Brennan's penthouse on the Gold Coast. The building was all glass and steel, 40 stories of wealth that reflected the dawn back at itself. But these men were not Dante's. They were FBI agents executing a federal warrant that had been signed at 3 a.m. by a federal judge who took a personal interest in cases where innocent women got shot in the street. Agent Sarah Voss led the team. She was tall, gray-haired, with the kind of face that had seen too much to be surprised by anything, but surprise flickered across it anyway when they found Tyler Brennan still asleep at 6:14 in the morning, cocaine arranged in neat lines on his nightstand like a confession, his girlfriend beside him unconscious. "Get up," Voss said, her voice like a blade through butter. Tyler's eyes opened. For 3 full seconds, he did not understand what was happening. The men in black seemed unreal. The badges seemed fake. Then the cuffs clicked around his wrists and understanding arrived like a gunshot. "You can't do this. My aunt will." "Your aunt is being arrested at this exact moment," Voss said. "In her home. In front of the cameras she has been courting for 30 years. In his safe, hidden behind a wall panel that took the agents 2 minutes to locate, they found ledgers. Actual paper ledgers, handwritten, detailing money laundering operations, names, amounts, dates going back 7 years. Margaret Harrington's name appeared 247 times. 247. Tyler Brennan was dragged out of his penthouse in boxer shorts, his face already collapsing, his voice rising to something between a scream and a plea. News cameras caught everything. The footage played on every Chicago station by noon. The spoiled nephew of a real estate empire, led away in handcuffs, begging about his rights, his lawyer, his aunt fixing this. His aunt would not be fixing anything. At 7:32 that same morning, FBI agents arrived at Margaret Harrington's Oak Park mansion with a warrant written in the careful language of federal law. Margaret was having breakfast, yogurt with berries, espresso, toast with marmalade imported from Italy. She was reading the real estate section of the Tribune when the knock came. Her arrest was public. It was deliberate. It was humiliating in a way that money could not fix. Agents walked her out past news cameras in her silk robe, her hair undone, her face frozen in the expression of someone who had never been told no by anything except time. The charges were read on the front steps: 30 years of money laundering, RICO violations, conspiracy, tax evasion. The evidence was overwhelming. Tyler's ledgers. Emails Margaret thought were encrypted but apparently weren't. Financial records from banks in the Caymans, traced back through shell corporations, following a path that led directly to her signature. The same signature that had signed thank-you notes to charity boards for 40 years. Her real estate firm's stock tanked before the market even opened. Business partners issued statements denying everything. Accounts were frozen. By evening, Margaret was in federal custody being processed like any other criminal, fingerprinted, photographed, stripped of every dignity she thought her wealth protected. In her mugshot, she looked older. Smaller. Like something essential had been removed. 2 months later, in a federal courtroom with high windows and the weight of justice pressing down from the ceiling, Valentina sat in the gallery. Dante was beside her. She had insisted on being here. On watching. Tyler Brennan was brought in wearing a grey prison jumpsuit. He had lost weight. His face was hollow. He did not look at Valentina. Could not. The judge's voice was steady. This court finds you guilty on all counts. Conspiracy, assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder, witness intimidation. You are sentenced to 40 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 25. Tyler's face crumpled. He wept openly, a broken man, led away in shackles by marshals whose expressions did not change. As if they had seen this 1,000 times. Margaret Harrington was brought in next. She wore a navy dress. Her hair was done. She had armor made of composure. It lasted until the judge spoke. 35 years. No bail pending appeal. As marshals led her to the holding area, she looked directly at Valentina for the first time. There was no apology in her eyes. No recognition of Valentina as human. Only hatred. Pure, focused hatred that this nobody waitress had dared to destroy her legacy. But Dante leaned close and whispered, "She can hate you from a cell. You are free. She never will be again." That evening, back at Valentina's apartment, she asked the question she had been holding like a stone in her chest. "How did you do it? The FBI, the timing, everything." Dante was sitting on the worn couch. Micah was playing with toy cars on the floor, making engine sounds, oblivious. Emma was asleep in the bedroom they shared now, a real bedroom, not a shelter bunk. "I did not fabricate anything," Dante said quietly. "Margaret and Tyler built their own cages with 30 years of greed and carelessness. I simply made sure the right people found the keys." He explained the deal. He had been collecting information on Margaret Harrington for years. Insurance, he called it. When Tyler shot Valentina, when the threat landed, Dante had approached the FBI with an offer, his evidence in exchange for immunity on certain unrelated matters and guaranteed protection for Valentina and her children. Agent Voss had taken it. Had wanted to take it. She had been trying to build a case against Margaret for a decade. "So you traded your information for my safety?" Valentina asked. "I traded their freedom for yours," Dante corrected. Fair exchange. But what Valentina did not know, as she sat there in that small apartment with Dante and her sleeping children and the sound of snow beginning to fall again outside the window, was that this was not the end of his plan for her. It was only the foundation. The March morning arrived with that particular quality of light that makes everything look possible. Valentina Harper stood in front of the bathroom mirror of the apartment that was still not quite hers, smoothing down the collar of a blouse she had purchased with money she earned. The pencil skirt hung properly now, fitted to a body that had begun to remember what it felt like to eat regular meals. She was 32 years old but looked it now instead of 47. In the kitchen behind her, Dante moved with the ease of someone who had been coming to this apartment 3 times a week for 4 months. He set down a coffee cup on the worn counter. The gesture was ordinary. The act of him being in her kitchen at sunrise, unsummoned, unbothered by the absence of marble or staff or anything that resembled his world, was everything. "You are nervous," he said. "Not a question." "It is my first week as an office manager," Valentina replied, catching her reflection's eyes. They were clearer now than they had been in years. "I am allowed to be nervous. You are overqualified for that position and we both know it." Dante's voice carried that particular timbre it had taken on over these months, stripped of the sharp edges that had once defined him. "But that is not what frightens you." Valentina turned to face him. This man, 6'2", shoulders built broad from a lifetime of carrying weight that was not merely physical, his dark eyes still holding that intensity that made people step aside in crowds, stood in her kitchen like he had earned the right to be here through something other than money or power. His tailored charcoal suit cost more than everything she had owned a year ago. His watch alone was worth $12,000. But he was drinking instant coffee from her chipped mug and asking about her day before work. "What frightens me," Valentina said carefully, "is that this might disappear. That I might wake up and discover this was a dream. That I will lose it all again." Dante set down his coffee. "You will not. You cannot promise that." "I can," he said. "Because what happened to you before, the fire, the shelter, the impossible choice between feeding your children and paying rent, that occurred because you had no one. No protection. No power. You are never unprotected again. Not because I own you, but because I choose you. Every single day, I choose you. That is not fragile. That is unbreakable." He kissed the top of her head and left before she could respond, the door closing quietly behind him. The apartment went silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a siren passing on the street below. Valentina finished her coffee and grabbed her bag. In it was the Greyhound bus ticket from 2 years ago, the one she kept as a reminder that she had survived that journey. She kept it next to her first paycheck from the medical supply company. $1,743. Hers. Earned. Real. The bus stop that held Emma and Micah was surrounded by other children in spring jackets, their backpacks bright and unmarked by time or struggle. Emma held Valentina's hand on the left side, Micah on the right, both of them chattering in that particular way children do when the world has finally become safe enough for noise. Mrs. Chen says we get to pick our own book project, Emma explained, age 8 now and already showing the careful politeness that came from having learned early that the world was conditional. But there was something else there too, the beginning of a girl who might expect good things to continue. I am going to pick a book about animals. Which animals? Valentina asked, noting the way Micah kept looking back at their apartment building like he could not quite believe they still lived there. All of them, Emma decided. Every single one. The bus arrived at 8:17. The doors opened with a hydraulic sigh. Neither child hesitated as they boarded. They had learned not to cling. But Valentina watched them find seats by the window, watched Emma wave, watched Micah's small hand press against the glass as the bus pulled away into the morning traffic. She stood there for 3 minutes after they were gone, crying in a way she had not permitted herself to cry since the hospital. These were not tears of loss. They were tears of disbelief that this, normal mornings, school buses, homework assignments, a child asking about book reports instead of whether they would eat dinner, could be real. A woman waiting for the next bus approached her quietly. Your kids? Yes, Valentina said, wiping her eyes. Yes, they are. You can see it, the woman said. How much you love them. It shows all over your face. Valentina nodded, unable to speak. The woman smiled and did not ask questions. The bus came and went, and Valentina turned back toward the neighborhood, toward the office building where she worked now, where people knew her as a competent woman who organized spreadsheets and solved scheduling problems and remembered everyone's birthday. May came cold and late, as May in Chicago often did. The apartment was warm inside. Dante sat at her kitchen table with Valentina's first rent check sitting between them. She had insisted on this conversation. He had tried to delay it for 3 months. You do not have to do this, Dante said for the 3rd time, his fingers tracing the edge of the check as if it might burn him. I do, Valentina replied. The kitchen was small. The table was thin particle board covered with a printed cloth. The check was for $900 for 1 month's rent. It represented 40 hours of overtime, careful budgeting, and the refusal to accept that she existed in someone else's debt. You understand what it means, do you not? To stand on your own feet. I understand that you are being stubborn. I understand that I love you, Valentina countered, her voice steady, but I will not be saved by you. I will not be owned by gratitude. We agree to this. Dante's jaw tightened. I do not want your money. Then do not take it as payment, Valentina said. Take it as proof. Proof that I am not that woman anymore. I am not the one who needed saving. I am the one who can save myself. We are equals, Dante, or we are nothing. Silence moved through the kitchen like a blade. Outside, the wind rattled the fire escape. Inside, 2 people sat with the weight of what it meant to choose someone, not because they had no other choice, but because the choice was freely made. Dante picked up the check. He looked at it for a very long time. Then he nodded once and stood, and Valentina knew he understood. The dynamic had shifted. The power had rebalanced. He was no longer her savior. He was simply a man choosing to stay. June arrived with clear skies and the kind of warmth that made children laugh without prompting. The park near Valentina's apartment had a bicycle path, and Micah had wanted a bicycle for months, not because he was spoiled, but because every other child in his class had one and he had noticed the exclusion without complaint. Dante appeared one Saturday morning with a red bicycle. Not purchased from his accounts but carried on his shoulder like he had walked to a store and chosen it personally. He helped Micah into the seat, held the small boy steady while running alongside him, jogging with the efficiency of a man whose body was trained for violence but was now employing it only toward balance and motion. "Do not look down," Dante instructed, his voice the particular tone he used with children, like they were small people who deserved complete honesty. "Look forward. You are not falling. You are flying." Micah pedaled forward, uncertain, then faster, then confident, then crashed directly into a hedge when he forgot to brake. Dante laughed. The sound was unfamiliar. Valentina, sitting on a bench beside Emma, had never heard him produce that particular noise. It was genuine. It cracked open something in his chest that had been sealed for 20 years. Sergio and Enzo sat in a black SUV 30 yards away, the engine running, their eyes tracking movement in the park as they always did, bodyguards, always bodyguards. They exchanged a look when Dante helped Micah back onto the bicycle. "What the hell happened to him?" Sergio muttered. "The boss is teaching a 6-year-old to ride a bike." "That woman happened," Enzo replied quietly. "Whatever she is doing, she is making him human again." By the time Dante rejoined Valentina and Emma on the bench, both children were asleep, Emma against Valentina's shoulder, Micah draped across Dante's lap, the red bicycle abandoned in the grass. They sat like that as the sun moved across the sky, neither of them speaking, both of them understanding that they had crossed some invisible threshold that could not be uncrossed. The Tuesday evening came ordinary and unremarkable. Emma and Micah asleep. 2 coffee cups cooling on a small table. The windows of the apartment opened to warm air that carried the sounds of the city, sirens distant, car horns occasional, the ambient noise of 7 million people living their lives. "I need to tell you something," Dante said, his voice different now. Uncertain in a way that made Valentina's breath catch. "I have been carrying it since the night you were shot, and if I do not say it now, I think it will destroy me." Valentina waited. She had learned the value of silence over these months. "When I knelt beside you on that diner floor," Dante continued, his hands unsteady, "watching you bleed after saving my daughter, a child you did not even know was mine, I understood that I had built my entire life on anger. My father was murdered when I was 17 years old, and instead of grieving him, I became him. Hard. Untouchable. Incapable of being hurt because I had ensured no one could matter to me." He met her eyes. "Then you stepped in front of 7 guns without hesitation. And I watched you rebuild your life these past months, refusing pity, demanding to be seen as an equal, standing on your own feet, and Valentina, I have fallen in love with you. Not because I saved you. Because you saved me first." Valentina's eyes filled with tears. "Dante. You do not have to feel the same way," he said quickly. "I am not asking for anything except that you know the truth. This is not debt. It is choice. Do you think I did not know?" Valentina asked, her voice breaking. "Do you think I did not feel it every time you walked into this apartment? Every time you helped Micah with homework? Every time you chose this, chose us, when you could have been anywhere else?" She took his hand. "I was terrified because I thought, how could this be real? But we are not those people anymore. You are not just the dangerous boss. I am not just the broken waitress. We are simply 2 people who chose to stay." They kissed as the sirens passed on the street below, the sound fading into the greater noise of the city, and somewhere in that kiss was the entire journey, from 7 bullets to this moment of absolute certainty. 1 year later, the backyard held a birthday party. Micah was 7 now. Emma was 9 and wore a sundress without flinching at the feel of fabric against her skin. Sergio stood at the grill, arguing with Enzo about charcoal temperature while both of them tried not to smile at how thoroughly their boss had become domesticated. Dante's daughter Sophia, 6 years old and unaware that her presence at birthday parties was still shocking to men who had known her father only as a man of violence, helped Micah open presents. She handed each one to him like a ritual, careful and serious, her small hands trembling slightly with the importance of the task. Valentina stood on the porch. Dante joined her, his arm around her waist as natural as breathing now. "Happy?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "This much happiness feels fragile." It is not fragile, Dante said. It is real. And real things require choosing them every day. Valentina leaned into him. Then I choose this. Every day. Every single day. Behind them, Micah laughed at something Sophia said. Emma ran through the sprinklers. The grill smoke rose into clear sky. The apartment that had been worn and insufficient had become a home that held not blood relations but something stronger, people who had seen the worst of the world and chosen to stay with each other anyway. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Valentina Harper learned this on a frozen January night when she took 7 bullets for a child she did not know, and Dante Russo learned it kneeling beside a dying waitress who showed him that true strength is measured not by how hard you can become, but by how open you can remain even after the world has given you every reason to close. If this story moved you, drop a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story that will change how you see the world. Comment below, do you believe people can change when they meet the right person? Let us know your thoughts. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. We wish you good health, joyful days, and peace in your heart. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.